Hi, anthropologists. You should have just learned a few new vocabulary words with your teacher before you started to watch this video. And so yesterday we talked a little bit about environments and about communities. And so before we really dive into this unit, you are going to learn a little bit of background knowledge about the world community. So you're going to learn about some things that are on our globe. So I am going to draw you a map. And the map that we're going to look at today is the world, say world with me, world map. And this particular world map is going to have some very specific boundaries. It's going to have some North American boundaries. So at the very end, I'm going to show you where different groups of indigenous people lived in North America. But for now, third graders, will you read this with me? World map with North American boundaries. So the first thing that you're going to find on pretty much any map is going to be something called a compass rose. Will you say compass rose with me? Compass rose. Now, a compass rose has our four cardinal directions, which are north, east, south, and west. Will you say these with me? North, east, south, west. When I was your age, I learned it by never eat shredded wheat. But I was told that shredded wheat is delightful, which I agree. So now I go by never eat soggy waffles. So third graders, our four cardinal directions on our read it with me compass rose are north, say it with me, north, east, south, and west. Something that you're also going to see on many maps is this imaginary line, well, kind of imaginary line. It's drawn on maps. But this line is called the equator. Will you say equator with me? Will you say equator to the ceiling? Will you say equator to your toes? So now the equator is an imaginary line. It's something that geographers have put on the world to help us divide the world into two hemispheres. Will you say hemispheres with me? Hemispheres. Will you say hemispheres to your toes? Hemispheres. We have the northern hemisphere, which is above the equator, and we have the southern hemisphere, which is below the equator. This is the, say it with me, northern hemisphere. This is the southern hemisphere. Say it with me, southern hemisphere. Now, the equator is drawn on maps and on globes. But if I was to look at the world from space, I wouldn't see it. It is an imaginary line. It's not actually on the world. It's something that we've added in order to make it so I can describe things in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Say that with me. Northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere. Now, you know that most of our globe is water. However, there are some parts that are land, and these land masses are called continents. Will you say continents with me? Continents. Will you say continents to the ceiling? Continents. Now, these are pieces of land that are protruding. Hold on, I'm going to show you this. Are protruding out of the water because the globe is a giant land mass, but most of the land is at the very bottom of the ocean. But some of it is protruding, say protruding with me, protruding or coming out of the water, protruding, coming out of the water. What does protruding mean? Coming out of the water. So many of our continents, well, all of them, are protruding from the water. Many people say that there are 7 continents. However, some people say there are 5, and some people say there are 6. So while I draw these continents and tell you about the 7 continents, which are protruding out of the water, see if you can figure out why some people say protruding and why some people say, sorry, not protruding, while some people say there's 6 continents, why some say 5, but most will say 7. Okay, I'm going back to my map. The first continent we are going to talk about is the continent of Europe. Will you say Europe with me? Europe. Europe is where many of your ancestors are from. If you have ancestors that are from places like Germany or Ireland or England or Poland. So if you have ancestors who are from England, Germany, Poland, Ireland, then your ancestors are from Europe. Will you read this with me? Europe. The first continent is Europe. Say it with me, Europe. The second continent, and I apologize, I drew a little over it. The second continent is Asia. And will you say Asia with me? Asia. Many of you have ancestors who are also from Asia. If you have ancestors who are from Japan or India or China, then you have ancestors who are from the continent of Asia. Say Asia with me, Asia. Sorry, my drawing's a little off today, but I'm gonna fix it for you, I promise. Okay, there you go. So far, our two continents are Europe and Asia. Will you say those names with me? Europe and Asia. And if you'll remember, at the very start of this, I asked you, well, why might people say that there are 6 continents or maybe even 5 continents? If you were to look at this map, why do you think right now? Just think for a minute. Okay. You'll also notice that Europe and Asia are located in which continent? If they're on the top half of the world, they are located on the northern hemisphere. If you said northern hemisphere, you are absolutely correct. Now, if I go from Asia and I travel south, I'm going to land on the continent of Australia. Will you say Australia with me? Australia. Now, Australia is home to some animals that you might recognize, like kangaroos or koala bears. And Australia is also kind of like an island because it's surrounded by nothing but water. Which hemisphere is Australia located in? Say it out loud. If you said southern hemisphere, you are absolutely correct. Australia is located to the south of which continent? If you said Asia, you are totally correct. Europe is located to what? Or Europe is located how to Australia? If you said north, west, you are totally correct. Now, if from Australia I was to travel to the west, I would be on the continent of Africa. Many people think that Africa is actually a country. However, it's not. It's a continent and it's home to many different countries. Will you say Africa with me? Africa. Now, you'll notice that there's something very unique about Africa that Europe and Asia and Australia, it doesn't happen to. What do you notice about Africa? If you said, I noticed that it's split by the equator, so I have the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, then you are absolutely correct. Africa is divided, which also means that right around the equator, you have really hot weather because the closer you get to the equator, the warmer it is. But as you get further and further away from the equator, the colder and colder it gets. And I know it's hard to see on this map because of my drawing, but the southernmost tip of Africa is actually pretty close to Antarctica, which means that it can be very cold there. So sometimes you might even see some penguins. All right. Now, will you read these 4 continent names with me? Read them with me. Europe, Asia, Australia, and Africa. Which continent is separated by the equator? If you said Africa, you are correct. Which continent is to the west of Asia? If you said Europe, you are correct. Which continent is located in the southern hemisphere? If you said Australia, you're correct. Now, If I travel a little further down, then I end up on the continent of Antarctica. Now, Antarctica is the one continent that people don't live on all year round. Instead, because it's just so cold and it's so uninhabitable for humans, meaning it's really hard to live there. So instead of living there forever and ever, we actually have a science base there, and it's an international science station. International means that you have countries from all over the world who have sent their scientists down to Antarctica to do some studying. And they study at a research station called McMurdo. Will you say that with me, McMurdo? And they do that in Antarctica. So far we have 5 continents. Will you read them with me? Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, Antarctica. And Antarctica is very cold, and this is where you'll often find your penguins. Now, which 2 continents are located only in the Southern Hemisphere? If you said Australia and Antarctica, you are totally correct. Which 2 continents are only in the Northern Hemisphere? If you said Europe and Asia, you are absolutely correct. Which country is divided by the equator? Sorry, which continent is divided by the equator? If you said Africa, you are totally correct. Which continent is to the south of Asia? If you said Australia or Antarctica, you are absolutely correct, and even parts of Africa. Which continent is located to the north of Antarctica? If you said Africa, Europe, Asia, or Australia, you are absolutely correct. Okay, here's a hard one for you. Which continent is located to the northeast of Antarctica? The northeast of Antarctica. If you said Africa or Asia or Australia, you are absolutely correct. Now, if on my map I was to continue going to the west, I'm going to end up on the continent of South America. Will you say South America with me? South America. South America is actually similar to Africa in that it's divided by the equator. Say equator with me, equator. Now read South America with me, South America. So South America, similar to Africa, is divided by the equator. Now, there's one part, sorry, I have to go a little higher. Now, if you travel a little bit north, you're going to end up on the continent of North America. Will you say North America with me? North America. And you all live on the continent of North America. North America is home to countries like Canada and the United States and Mexico, and don't forget all the little islands that hang out over here. They're also considered part of North America. So you'll notice that North America and South America seem to be joined by this piece of land. And this piece of land that it's joined by is called, or is Panama, which is a country. And that's what connects North America and South America. Will you say these names with me? North America, South America. All right, anthropologists, will you read all 5 continents with me? North America, South America, Antarctica, Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, Antarctica. All right, 3rd graders, there are 7 continents. Read them with me one more time. Antarctica, Australia, Asia, Europe, Africa, South America, North America. But at the very beginning, I asked you, why might some people say there are 5 continents and some people might say there are 6 continents? Think about it. The reason some people might say that there are 5 continents or 6 continents is because there's nothing that separates Asia and Europe, and there's nothing that separates South America and North America. And so you might say, well, why don't we just call them one continent? And the reason we don't call them one continent is because we want to be as precise as possible. Imagine if I was lost and I called you and I said, hey, I'm lost. And you said, okay, where are you? And I said, well, I'm in Asia. You would be looking at this entire landmass. It's huge. Or I said, well, I'm in the Americas. I would be looking at this entire landmass. It's huge. So instead, we've named them so we can be a little bit more specific. This part is Asia. This part is Europe. All right, third graders, before we're done for the day, will you read the 7 continents with me one more time? North America, Europe, Asia, Australia, Antarctica, South America, and Africa. Oh, actually, I have 2 questions for you. Which continent is to the west of Europe? If you said either North America or South America, you're totally correct. To the west, to the west. Which continent is to the east of South America? If you said Africa, you're right. If you said Antarctica, you're right. If you said Europe, you're right. If you said Asia, you're correct. And if you said Australia, you are also right. All right, anthropologists, we will finish drawing the rest of this tomorrow. Bye.